Invincible never apologizes for its deaths. No slow motion, no dramatic music cue to tell you how to feel, no resurrection that undoes what was done. These are the 8 that hit the hardest, ranked from the ones that hurt to the one the show built a character arc around. Let's break this down. The Thraxens, they had names. The show established this specifically in Season 2 before killing them. Andressa, who had married Nolan and spoken to Mark about what it meant that he existed. Nuolzot, who had welcomed them. The various Thraxens who had organized their civilization around an alien king and who had, by the time the Viltrumite soldiers arrived, developed enough of a relationship with Nolan that his presence on their world was the most significant event in their recent history. The massacre was conducted by Lucan, Thula, and Vidor and was depicted by the show with deliberate specificity, not an abstracted population statistic, but individual Thraxens being killed in the streets and fields of a civilization that the previous episode had spent time making recognizable as a place where people actually lived. The show then had Mark and Nolan return from their fight with the Viltrumites to find the capital razed and bodies in the streets. Nolan's response was the specific grief of someone who had grown to care about these people in the particular way that Viltrumites were not supposed to be capable of caring about anyone, and Mark's response was the helplessness of someone who had hidden the people he was supposed to protect in a cave while their civilization was destroyed. The Thraxens' deaths were not the worst in the show's body count. They were the clearest early demonstration of what the Viltrum Empire actually cost in human terms when it moved against a world. And the show did not let Mark look away from what he had been unable to prevent. Darkwing 2. He went in knowing he probably was not coming back out. Darkwing 2. Benjamin Taylor, the former sidekick of the original Darkwing, who had taken on the name and developed his predecessor's abilities into something more complete, had the power to access a pocket dimension called the Shadowverse, a space adjacent to normal reality that he could use to hide in shadows, move through, and send others into. During the Invincible War, when one of the evil alternate universe Invincible variants called No Gogglesible was causing destruction that the heroes on scene could not directly stop, Darkwing 2 used his ability to trap them both inside the Shadowverse simultaneously, taking himself into a dimension with a creature he could not outfight, in a space that no one else on the team could access to help or retrieve him from, specifically to remove the threat from the normal world where it was killing people. The show communicated his fate through implication rather than explicit confirmation. His status after entering the Shadowverse with No Gogglesible was classified as unknown, which in the show's established vocabulary meant the same thing that unknown means. When someone walks into a space, no one can follow them into carrying something that had been tearing through every hero it encountered. He was not dramatically eulogized. He was not celebrated in a scene designed to process the loss. He walked into a shadow and the show moved on, which was in its own way the most honest accounting of what his sacrifice looked like from outside it. Donald Ferguson, he has died twice, and neither death was clean about it. The first time, Donald was caught in an explosion at the GDA facility, a blast that Cecil's operations had generated that Donald had no forewarning of and no capability to survive through any conventional means, and that left Cecil without his most trusted operational agent at the moment the show's first season was escalating toward its major confrontations. The second season revealed that Donald was alive because Cecil had rebuilt him as an android, a reconstruction so comprehensive that Donald himself did not know, had not been told, and had been operating under the assumption that he had simply survived an explosion through some combination of resilience and medical intervention that he did not fully remember. The specific cruelty of Donald's situation in Season 2 was not the discovery itself, but the sequence. Donald found the evidence of what he was while investigating, processed it alone, and then had to decide what to do with the knowledge that his life since the explosion had been artificial in a way his prior life had not been. The show did not give him a clean resolution to this crisis. He was killed again in Season 2 under circumstances that left him in approximately the same state of uncertain reconstruction potential. Donald's arc across 2 seasons documented what happens when the person most responsible for keeping other people's secrets finds out that the most significant secret in his own life was being kept by the person he trusted most. Adam Eve. He punched through her stomach. The specific mechanics of what Conquest did to Adam Eve during Season 3's finale were not ambiguous. A single physical strike from a 5,000-year-old Viltrumite warrior deployed as the Empire's maximum force option, directed at a woman whose matter manipulation abilities had been causing him genuine trouble, applied with the specific intention of removing her from the fight definitively. The show depicted her death with enough clarity that the subsequent sequence was legible as grief rather than concern. Mark holding her, the blood, the stillness, the show not rushing past what had just happened toward the next plot development. What followed was the event that defined the rest of Season 3's conclusion. Eve's powers, triggered by the proximity to complete cessation in a way they had never been triggered during conscious operation, activated at a level that exceeded anything she had demonstrated to that point, and reduced Conquest to a state that made the final exchange between him and Mark possible. Her death was temporary in the technical sense. What it produced in Mark was not temporary. The show used the specific sequence, Conquest killing Eve, Eve surviving and activating her full power, Mark responding to both events simultaneously, to document the precise moment where Mark's relationship to restraint and mercy changed into something the earlier seasons had been building toward without arriving at. He had always been capable of the rage that followed. It took Eve's death to remove the reason he had been choosing not to use it. The original Guardians of the Globe. The show gave them 15 minutes. Red Rush, the Russian speedster who moved faster than human perception and whose last act was throwing himself at Omni-Man at a velocity no one else in the room could match. Darkwing, the gadget-wielding cape detective who co-founded the team. War Woman, the ancient warrior whose combat capability was matched only by her institutional authority. Aquarus, the hydrokinetic king of an underwater civilization. Martian Man, the exiled shapeshifter who had found belonging in this specific group of people. Green Ghost, the suit-wearing superheroine whose powers made her one of the team's most versatile members. The Immortal, the Celtic warrior who had survived millennia and who could not survive the next 2 minutes. The show introduced all 7 of them in the first episode and killed all of them in the same episode, and the 15 minutes between their introduction and their deaths was precisely calibrated to make you care enough that the killing mattered. The basement fight was not presented as action, it was presented as something the show wanted the audience to understand was wrong. The specific visual register of seeing people who had been introduced as heroic, competent, and worth knowing being dismantled one by the person who had been positioned as the show's moral center, without any of them landing a meaningful strike, without any of them escaping, without any of them getting anything that could be described as a fair fight. The show used the original Guardians' deaths to establish the rules everyone else operated under from that point forward. Nobody was safe. That was not a warning. It was a demonstration. Red Rush's last act. He was the fastest person on the team, and the show used that fact to make his death the most specific tragedy in the first episode's massacre. Red Rush, Joseph, a Russian speedster whose perception operated so far above baseline that ordinary events appeared to him as photographs rather than motion, was the only Guardian who reacted to Omni-Man's attack before it was too late to react. He moved at a speed the show rendered as the world going still around him while he operated in real time, crossing the room in the interval between moments that the other Guardians did not have time to register, reaching Omni-Man before any other hero could respond. What Red Rush was attempting to do was stop Omni-Man from continuing to kill his teammates, not through a power matchup he had any realistic chance of winning, because his speed was not combat strength and Omni-Man was not someone Red Rush could hurt, but through the specific intervention of someone who was the only person in the room fast enough to try. Omni-Man grabbed him by the head. The show did not cut away the specific detail that the show chose to include, the image of Omni-Man holding Red Rush after ending him. While the man's wife's name was the last thing on his lips, turned the fastest person in the room's death into the most human moment in a sequence that the show had structured as an escalating horror. He was killed in the act of attempting something that had no chance of succeeding. That was the point. Rex Splode. What was left fit on a wall. The Invincible War in Season 3 brought alternate universe evil versions of Mark Grayson to the main timeline, and one of them, Goggles Vincible, had been responsible for critically wounding Rex and forcing the confrontation that led to Rex's death. Out of weapons, out of options, with the evil Invincible variant in front of him and his teammates behind him, Rex did the one thing that his specific power set made possible that no other option could achieve. He ignited his own skeleton, detonating the kinetic energy stored in his bones outward, killing the alternate Invincible and himself simultaneously. The show depicted the aftermath through a silhouette burned into the wall, the shape of Rex Splode at the moment of detonation, preserved as an outline, an image the show explicitly framed as a reference to the shadows burned into surfaces at Hiroshima. The deliberateness of that reference was the show acknowledging what Rex's death meant at the scale it was asking the audience to feel it. He had started the series as a character specifically designed to be disliked. The arrogant, unfaithful teammate who cheated on Adam Eve, who prioritized his own image over his responsibilities, who existed largely as an obstacle to the relationship between Mark and Eve. The arc the show built over 3 seasons was the arc of a person slowly, imperfectly, genuinely becoming someone worth following. The funeral was the show's definitive statement on who Rex had become. Robot renaming himself in Rex's honor, not as sentimentality, but as acknowledgement that the person who had given him his body had ended up larger than the person who had provided the DNA. The Thraxan civilization, he came back to find them dead. This is the death that the show chose to assign to Mark rather than to Omni-Man or the Viltrumites. In the specific framing of the Thraxen massacre in Season 2 was not primarily about who killed them, but about where Mark was when they were being killed and what he had been doing. He had been in a cave. He had put Andressa and infant Oliver in a cave because that was the safest place he could think of, and he had gone to fight Viltrumites while their civilization burned, and when the fight was done, he came back to find a capital city full of the people he had been sent to save. The show gave Nolan the moment of specific grief, turning on Mark in the ruins, asking in fury why he found himself caring about these people at all, the Viltrumite, who had been on this planet long enough to love it having to watch it happen again on a smaller scale. Mark's response was to spend 2 months on Thraxa rebuilding, not fighting, not training, rebuilding manually an economy and infrastructure for a population that had been reduced by the Viltrumites' enforcement action. The show staged this as penance rather than duty, Mark staying not because the mission required it, but because leaving immediately would have been a refusal to account for what staying and fighting had cost the people he had been there to protect. He eventually left with Oliver. The capital was still destroyed, the people were still dead. The show did not give him the option of a clean exit from either fact.